Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Dr. Simona Hennebaum. I am the Schools Liaison Coordinator at the Faculty of Law at the University of Cambridge, and I'd like to welcome you to our Legal Careers Q&A webinar offered as part of the university's September Open Days. We've got some panelists who are Cambridge alumni from various firms who are part of our Access and Widening Participation partnership and supporters. Those firms are Clifford Chance, Freshfields, Hogan Lovells. Unfortunately, none of the solicitors from Hogan Lovells were able to join us today, but we are still grateful for their continued support for activities such as this, as well as Maitland Chambers. So before I introduce our panelists, I just want to cover a couple of housekeeping notes for the session today. First and foremost, as you will have seen on the slide, please submit your questions via the Q&A function. If you see a question that you'd like to ask and somebody else has already asked it, please feel free to kind of upvote that a bit so we can see what you'd like us to talk about. But we've also got some other kind of pre-submitted questions as well that we can use for the duration of our conversation today. Another thing to just bear in mind that we'll be focusing on the kind of personal experiences of lawyers, their journey to law and their careers. So this isn't really going to be talking about our admissions as such. So if you are interested or have questions about admissions, please join us tomorrow for our subject Q&A. I will post the link to that information right now in the chat. For anybody who's interested and hasn't signed up for that. If you just head over to that website, look under law, you'll see the subject Q&A webinar, which will be a webinar like this one, as well as a Slido chat that will happen in the morning. So if you've got admission questions, join us tomorrow or feel free to send us an email. So with that in mind, let's get started. So I'd like to, our panelists to just introduce themselves, say their name, let us know what they studied at Cambridge if they didn't study law, where they are based now, so what firm they are at, what their position is, and what their legal specialization is. So I'll turn it over to our panelists. Who would like to go first?
I'll go first, I suppose. My name is Gregory Banner. I was at Trinity Hall between 1985 and 1988. It's probably quite a long time ago compared to the age of my audience. I read law. I read law principally because Claire next door were too mean to let me in to read maths the year before. I came straight to the bar after university. I specialize in company and commercial work, and I've been doing that ever since, pretty much.
Thank you, Gregory. Rowena, would you like to introduce yourself? Yeah. Oh, sorry, Daniel, sorry.
No, Rowena,
we'll do Daniel, then Rowena.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. I am Rowena Page. I'm also at Maitland Chambers with Greg. I'm matriculated in 2008 at Emmanuel College. I also studied law, and I now specialise in company, commercial and insolvency work at Maitland. Daniel.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'm Dan Newton. I'm a senior associate at Freshfields. I was at Trinity between 2003 2007 doing law. It was 4 years because I did the Erasmus year in France. And my specialist area at the moment is financial services regulation. And my wife, who I met at Trinity, is also a lawyer. And she says I'm a nerd, and it's a very boring area, but I love it.
Great. Why don't we turn it over to Kira, and then we'll go to Jonathan.
Hi, everyone. My name's Kira Simpson. I'm a trainee solicitor at Freshfields, and I studied law at Christ College from 2016 to 2019.
Hi, everyone. My name's Jonathan Coote. I actually studied music at Robinson between 2011 and 2014, and then completed the GDL, so the year-long law conversion course. And I'm now an associate at Clifford Chance, so qualified about 6 months ago into the intellectual property team.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for that introduction. So just to get the conversation rolling, we'll kind of start with those kind of pre-Cambridge days and kind of thinking about, for those who did study law, why they wanted to study law. And Jonathan, I'd love to hear about your journey to music and then on to law after that, and when that decision came up and potentially why, if you're comfortable sharing with us, because that's a different route. And I think a lot of people always think that if you do a GDL, it's because you did history or maybe economics or something like that. So it's interesting to see that transition from music. And then kind of related, if you want to maybe talk about those of you who did study law, did you know you wanted to be a practicing lawyer when you started studying, or did you kind of choose law for another reason and then moved into careers that way? So let's kind of address that. So who'd like to go first?
I'm happy to go first. Sorry, it took me a second to find the mute button. So before university, I decided on law because I think I was wanting something that was a bit prestigious, and it was law or medicine, and I faint very easily. I fainted at my wife's first scan for a child, so I wasn't even having anything done to me. So medicine was out of the question. So law was sort of there, and oddly at my sixth form we had a teacher who taught law as an A-level, so I had a bit of a taster of it as well, and really enjoyed it. So that was the easy decision, and there was no real career thought at that point in time. It was more just I was keen to study a subject that I thought had some kudos and was sort of well established. And then when I got to university, it was mainly the wining and dining from the city firms that was quite appealing. And I sort of saw their lifestyle and thought, well, I could live with that. And I got very lucky in the sense that I then discovered when I got here, I actually liked the work as well and the people I work with. So for me, it was a series of kind of happy coincidences without some real great master plan or anything.
Yes, my experience was very much like Dan's. Fell into it rather from school, and knew that I didn't want to study any of my A-level subjects, which were history, English and maths. Thought it looked like an interesting thing to do for 3 years. Quite liked that it sounded quite fancy. Had no particular career designs at that point, but once I actually started, quite enjoyed it as a subject, quite enjoyed mooting, had a go at that and found out I could do it, which surprised me as much as anyone. And yeah, went from there really.
Yes, warming to this theme of accidental lawyers. As I said, I didn't get into my first choice college for my first choice subject, so ended up choosing law as something that I thought would give me a bit of flexibility, and also because I had enjoyed as a teenager watching a television series called The Paper Chase about Harvard law undergraduates, which is really very old now. Found I sort of liked it, but wasn't wowed by it. Decided to go to bar school really as an excuse to defer trying to work out what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And at bar school realized that I enjoyed it more as a practical subject than an academic subject. Sorry, Simone. Then sort of fell into pupillage again, more through inertia and fortune than anything else. Got an offer of a tenancy at the end of that, and then thought, oh, well, this is quite good. I don't need to make any career decisions for a good few years now. And it all seemed to work out quite well in the end. But there was no grand master plan, and I'm slightly suspicious of teenagers or people in their early 20s that have a grand master plan that'll carry them through to their 60s, I'm afraid.
Kira, would you, or Jonathan?
No,
maybe Kira, and then we'll go to Jonathan.
Yeah, it's the same as everyone else's. No real grand ideas from an early age. Law was a sensible choice of degree rather than doing something whimsical in the eyes of people like parents. Went off to do a law degree, enjoyed it, and like Dan, wined and dined by law firms, the promise of a good salary when all my friends don't know what to do when they graduate, is what led me to where I am now, really. Nothing more kind of planned than that.
And Jonathan?
Yeah, so in terms of my decision to study music initially, so I played guitar, and I essentially thought I would regret it if I didn't study music. It's the thing I most enjoyed. And one major thing was doing the unique summer school, which is the Oxford, I think, equivalent of the Sutton Trust summer school at Cambridge, and did that in music and just really, really enjoyed it. And I did really enjoy studying it academically, although it was quite a sort of general historical course, so not a very practical course, which kind of left me at the end thinking, what do I want to do? Do I want to be a teacher, or do academic things, or be a performer? And my now wife's father was at the time a solicitor, and sort of spoke to him about what he did and sounded really interesting, did some work experience, and then so after graduating decided to do the GDL. So no great master plan either.
And of course, there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's been interesting here. What I'm hearing from everybody is this idea of, the separation of law as an academic subject from the vocational, and for some that was appealing and interesting, and for others maybe less so. And so just to kind of highlight that, you can think of law as a route into kind of the practical, but it is an academic subject. And by the sounds of it, some people were just like, well, I like law, this sounds interesting, and then finding, a legal path that way. And I'm sure you'll all have friends or schoolmates that you knew where it was the other way around. They started law and thought, I don't want to be a lawyer, but this subject is interesting, and then went on to do other sorts of things. Great. So in that, and I think just because you're all Cambridge students, you'll be able to kind of address this sort of question, was this idea of balancing your studies alongside extracurriculars. Because of course, the big general kind of assumption with Cambridge is that all you do is study and you don't have free time for anything like that. So I was wondering if you guys could maybe address that for anybody who's listening in today. And also maybe think about how maybe your extracurricular activities gave you skills or experiences that you think are actually useful for what you do now.
I sort of, my work started here at the beginning of Cambridge, and extracurricular was here, and then I got the balance better towards the latter end. If I could change one thing, but I probably wouldn't because I had such a good first year, I would probably tell my first year self to just take it slightly easy on drinking and clubbing. And those extracurricular activities didn't really translate well into interviews and persuading people to employ me. Now, I think I got a really good balance of law work and extracurricular at uni. I had a really wonderful time. I did quite a lot of rowing. You probably can't tell from the video, but I'm sillily tall, which just means that rowing's quite easy for me compared to real sports. I did a bit of music before I got to uni, and I carried on with that. Although actually at uni, everyone was so much better at music than I was. So I had to find somewhere sort of suitably amateur to slot in. In terms of then translating those into useful interview things and ways of demonstrating skills and so on, and using the skills in my current career. I mean, I'm on the interview panel for Freshfields, so I see a lot of people coming through, and extracurricular activities can be more or less obviously relevant to your career, but what always stands out is people who talk about things that they've done that they're passionate about. So for example, mooting's an obvious choice for someone who wants a legal career, especially as a barrister. It's clearly highly relevant. But I remember an interview where someone had taken up ballet dancing at quite a late stage and was just so clearly in love with the whole thing. Hearing them talk about that and work out the transferable skills into a career in law in terms of dedication, hours involved in the training of it, that spoke much more clearly in an interview. And I think probably also was more powerful in demonstrating some of the skills we look for in selecting people. So for anyone thinking about extracurricular, I wouldn't get too hung up on what would or wouldn't look good on a application. It's better to just do the things you love, and then when you talk about them, that will come across.
Yeah, I think when I went up to Cambridge, I was quite surprised that at the sheer scope of extracurricular activities that were on show and on display and on offer. I mean, honestly, going to Freshers Week and going to the kind of, they had a big fair, I think, and you could do anything from, you know, join the abseiling club to joining the frisbee club to joining the chess club to, you know, all on a kind of varying levels of academic pursuit. I personally did a kind of reasonably light touch approach to extracurriculars, partly like Dan, you know, I had quite a nice time just hanging out with my friends at university and going out and enjoying their company and meeting people. So it wasn't that I didn't do, you know, blues hockey because I didn't have time because of law. I didn't do it partly, well, couldn't have done it, firstly. And also I enjoyed just, you know, seeing friends. But that said, I still played college sport. I played college netball. I got very involved in the Law Society at Cambridge and in mooting in general. Now, that was, you know, the mooting side of things was obviously good from a career perspective and gave me an idea of that public speaking role and the, you know, the adversarial role that you can take on, which I had no real experience of at school. You know, I didn't do any debating or anything like that when I was at school. So for me, it was the first time I had that kind of experience, and it was good to build up the skill set. But it also provided that social side of things, because the whole Law Society itself is a body which you can get involved in and has or had, you know, lots of events and things that were planned, which I find really enjoyable, actually, to just be part of another little kind of family within the Cambridge system. So it's not just all study. There's quite a lot of going out and having fun as well. And you can build up different networks within the university, whether it's a sporting network or a different society, or you're just your friends that you can enjoy right now.
I've been back a couple of times for my college law society dinners and spoken to undergraduates or recent undergraduates, and my sense is that my experience as an undergraduate, which sounds like it largely mirrors Dan's first year, probably isn't reflective of how current undergraduates spend their time. My rather meager contribution to this debate, though, is this: whatever you do that's extracurricular, find something to do that's extracurricular. Find something to do that you enjoy, because everybody enjoys something other than work. Find it and do it. If for no other reason than it will teach you how to strike a balance between work and non-work. Because I think law is a subject, probably much like medicine, that has a knack of really sucking people into it and sucking all the time out of them. And it's very important, in my view, to be able to maintain a balance between your work and your non-work life. And the best place to learn how to acquire that balance is at university, I think.
Absolutely. Very, very poignant advice there. And I think that's one that we've all taken on board. And actually something I think we need to remind ourselves, even as adults, moving onward as we gather commitments and responsibilities, is to always leave a little slice of fun to provide, you know, energy and to recharge in other ways. Jonathan or Kira, would you like to add comments to that? Or yes, Jonathan.
Yeah, no, I'd sort of echo what everyone else is saying. I think in one sense, I think law is quite I didn't study law, but I think it's quite a particular subject in that I'm not sure and any other departments would have a sort of career session before actually starting your degree. And there's probably more of a focus on the careers element whilst studying potentially than in other subjects, which is good in one sense, but it is definitely important to sort of, I did college football where I played for the seconds team, and I'm absolutely terrible, and you know, hasn't helped me in many ways, but actually in terms of just doing something on the weekend where I just got out, played, didn't think about work, I found that, and didn't think about sort of doing music, which was sort of useful for my degree as an extracurricular activity. I found that really, really helpful.
Great. Thank you. Carrie, would you have any? Yes, please add something.
Yeah, I would just say kind of don't take everything too seriously. Just have a good time. Make the most of still being a student while you can. It's a chance to get involved in some things that you might never do another time. Like, it's not like you can just pop off down the park and play lacrosse for the weekend. So just have some fun with people in your college, use it as an opportunity to make friends. And similarly with things like college level sport, it's very laid back. If you can't make it one week, it doesn't matter. So there's no real downside of getting involved with something like that. It's just a chance to try out some different things.
Absolutely. Very sage advice, everyone. So I guess on that note, then, I'm hearing things that we might tell our younger selves, but what would be that thing that you would tell your 16 or 17-year-old self applying to Cambridge, about to embark? What would be that little advice that you tell yourself at this point in time, reflecting back?
If I may, I noticed that someone posted in the chat about whether you should choose a law degree if you want to go on to be a lawyer, or whether you should choose a non-law subject and then go on to do the conversion course. In hindsight, I probably wouldn't have studied law. I don't think it's really necessary to go on to become a lawyer. If it's interesting to you, then great, you can develop a lot of skills from a law degree. But I always had a passion for languages. And in hindsight, probably would have done an MML degree, gone off on a year abroad, and then done a law conversion after. So I think my main advice to my younger self and to everyone on the call would be just to choose the subject that you're passionate about, and that you think you're going to enjoy studying for 3 years. If you want to be a lawyer, do the conversion after that. It's an amazing kind of possibility to go on to do that, to then become a lawyer. So that's my advice.
Just to add a counter to Kira's position, I really enjoyed my law degree. I chose it because I thought it would be interesting for a few years without any particular designs to go into law. And I found it really interesting. And I found it particularly interesting in second and third years, when you can have an influence on what sort of subjects you study and where you want to go with them. So I've had a lot of people at the time that I chose to study law saying to me, why don't you do an interesting subject for a few years and then you can convert to law later on? And if you're not interested in law, then absolutely couldn't agree more. If you've got something that you're really interested in, then that's what's going to actually carry you through the late nights in the library and the prep for exams and all of that. But I wouldn't assume that law is necessarily as dry and boring as people say it is, because I actually find it really interesting. I'm sorry, just to answer the question, what would I say to my younger self? I think probably I would. So I had a very hefty amount of kind of anticipatory imposter syndrome going into Cambridge, worried that everyone was going to be formidably intelligent and clever and confident and everything. And I would say to my 16 or 17-year-old self, you'll fit in, you'll find people, you'll have a great time, and don't worry about that side of things. If you've been accepted into Cambridge, it's because they see potential in you, or they think that you're good enough, and don't doubt the opinions of some very, very clever people who have looked very carefully at your application. You are good enough to be there.
Daniel or Jonathan, I know that you guys are both unmuted, so would you like to weigh in?
It's a short one for me. I think I'd probably try and convince my 16-year-old self to get over the fear of missing out. I don't know whether I could do that or whether I had to live through it, but certainly there was that feeling when I started out at uni that I had to be there to the end of the party just in case something happened. And I had to, so I had to sort of be everywhere, see everything, do everything. And it was only latterly, with a little bit more maturity, that I realized that I should just pick the things I wanted to do and places I wanted to be, and then you get a lot more out of it. But otherwise, I think I probably wouldn't want to disturb the sort of naivety too much. I went in quite unawares in first year, and in hindsight, that was quite a good thing. I think if I'd had too many schemes and plots, I wouldn't have had so much fun.
I think in terms of my advice I'd give to myself, I think I went to a school where I was usually, if not always, doing sort of the best in every exam, and not necessarily being taught to sort of like get an A star, but sort of trying to push on and doing really, really well. And I think when I got to Cambridge, I sort of potentially took that on too much and was always like trying to get a first, and was quite annoyed if I would be getting a 2-1. And I think in hindsight, I would say actually sort of celebrate doing fine and getting through, because actually everyone else is really, really smart, and just sort of getting through is actually really important. And I think one of the weird things about having a sort of 2-1 system is that the majority of people get, because the majority of people get a certain grade, it feels like it's not sort of an achievement, but actually sort of taking the time to go, wow, that's a really great achievement to get a 2-1 at Cambridge. I think that's what I think that would have helped me sort of put less stress on myself.
Yeah, it's good advice. Greg, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, I was a cocky teenager, so I think I'd tell myself, listen, sunshine, you're quite clever, but you're not actually as clever as you think you are, and you're going to find that out, and it's going to be a fairly rude awakening, so brace yourself for that. I think I might have also said, try and work a bit smarter than you're going to work. Be more efficient in the way you work, and use the time that you can save just doing a bit more than you did outside of the bar being the one that serves drinks, not the bar that one practices advocacy at. And I think would have said, in the first year there's going to be a girl called Liz. Don't look over her or pass her by, because that's the person you're going to marry. So just keep your eyes peeled.
Yeah, I mean, Cambridge, it's produced careers, it's produced families, by the sounds of things as well, quite happily. So that's good. We've got a question in the chat that I think is interesting, that I think would be a nice way to kind of segue from kind of what we learn at school and our kind of traits, and then move into maybe some of the more career-oriented questions that we have up, which is, as practicing lawyers, is there a certain personality trait that you might see in yourself or fellow lawyers? I assume this is to be, that people find successful. I think it's kind of the implied part of the question there, and what those traits or qualities might be.
I think I'd say there's nothing that's universal. There are some that are more common, but certainly I don't think I've ever noticed anything that every single lawyer has, that every single successful lawyer. And there's a risk and a danger in that, in the sense that if you are ending up in a place where everyone has similar personality traits, it probably means they're not diverse enough as an institution, and they'll have groupthink, which carries its own risks. That said, the people that we interview tend to do well, and then the people at Freshfields who do well have traits. Most of them have traits like things have to be right. So the sort of people, if there's a spelling mistake on the menu at a restaurant, they can't help themselves but point it out. That's a good sign that you will care when you're reading documents that they are right. There's a sort of, the lawyers, at least that I really like dealing with, have a very relaxed confidence, in the sense that if I have a junior in the team who's good, they tend to be the sort of person you would comfortably leave in a room with new clients or someone, and you're not going to worry that they're going to mess things up. They're confident enough in themselves that they can interact with clients well. And then common sense and enthusiasm, they sound really dull and boring, but actually the hours that we work sometimes demonstrating common sense and enthusiasm at all times is often quite difficult. And those are the two traits that I think really help, especially at the junior end, help people stand out from the crowd.
Anyone else have some thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm a bit slow on my unmute button. Yes, the positive personality traits. I think, as Dan says, somebody with a good eye for detail. That sort of, you saw most lawyers' arms up, and you'd see that written on the stump like a piece of rock from the beach on Brighton. I think a good communicator, a relaxed, fluent conversationalist is quite important, because that is a lot of our job. Increasingly being personable. The profession has changed quite a lot since I started, in the sense that when I started, a big part of the pie chart of characteristics of a successful barrister, at least, would be intellectual firepower. And now a huge part is personability and service delivery. You still need to be clever, but people aren't going to instruct you anymore just on the basis that you're clever. They want somebody who they can get on with when your backs are against the wall and the ack is raining down upon you. That's the sort of thing, I suppose. I think fundamentally fluency in communication is something that we look for in interviews.
Just to add to that, I think I don't know whether this was the sort of intention of the question. I think one misconception is potentially that all lawyers are sort of massively argumentative, and I don't think that is actually true. And I'm very on the non-argumentative as a personality trait side, and would say there's a whole sort of range of different personalities, but it's not like if you become a lawyer, you're surrounded by people who are arguing over which seat they're going to sit at, and actually being personable and being a good communicator and often trying to find sort of compromises are actually more important than just being unnecessarily argumentative.
Rowena or Kira, do you have any thoughts?
I suppose one point that I suppose isn't necessarily a personality trait I see in everyone, but is one that I think is very important and potentially underrated, is actually caring about the work that you're doing, caring about your clients, caring about the job. You'd be amazed, or I have been amazed, starting at the bar, how many barristers don't really care. They just see it as a job, go home at the end of the day. They don't really care about their clients. And, it depends a bit, because if you've got a big corporation as your client, then maybe that's more applicable. But often you don't. Often there's a person. And I don't like being against people who don't care if they get things wrong, or they don't care if they lose, particularly because they see it as a way to make money and not a lot more. I think it matters, and I think people matter. And you can lose sight of the fact that there's a person at the end of the case that you're doing, every case that you're doing, actually. So that's what I would say is a personality trait that probably isn't necessarily looked for, or possibly it is, but is one that really matters. And it translates into doing that extra bit of work, doing that extra research, making sure that you've dotted every I and crossed every T in your client's interests. So it translates into other very positive personality traits, but is of itself, I think, something that you should be conscious of and look to promote in yourself.
Right, let's move on to another question, if we may. So let's talk about why you chose to be solicitors or why you chose to be barristers, where applicable, as opposed to vice versa. And I think from there, we'll then kind of maybe ask about what the day-to-day looks like. What do you enjoy best about your day-to-day? What is a little bit more stressful? That sort of a thing. So we can start at least with that first, why a particular route, and then we'll move from there. And I hope that just like some people who've asked some Q&As that we are seeing them, we'll weave them in. So don't worry, we will ask them when it's appropriate to do so. So, solicitors or barristers, how'd you choose?
I love working in a team. I know barristers work in teams as well, but in the sense that I'm surrounded by people with doors open and we all kind of chat to each other and it's quite noisy. And I know my wife is a barrister and working from home during coronavirus, she doesn't like the noise I make and me bothering her constantly. She prefers to sort of sit and get her work done and focus. I know that I wouldn't work as hard or as diligently if I didn't have lots of people around and lots of accountability. I can't be trusted to be left on my own to, like a barrister can, to kind of, I've got 2 weeks to get this thing done and I need to work on it a little bit each day. I would fail at that. I also really appreciate being in a big organization for how many worries it takes off your plate. It's not the sort of thing I ever thought about before I joined, so it wasn't part of my decision-making process, but I appreciate it now. My pension is there. I just press a button on the selection thing when it comes around each year. Everything is, all the sorts of the medical insurance. We've recently moved to a new building, so we don't have this anymore, but we used to have a dentist on site and a doctor on site that you could see. Just so many things that when you're working quite so many hours, that they kind of take the worry off your plate. But yeah, the main thing was being around people and sort of being a bit of noise. That was a big thing.
Who'd like to go next?
I think, as I said earlier, I got into, became a barrister more through default of failing to choose anything else to do. But reality is, I suppose, I've got the sort of personality that prefers to work alone. And listening to Dan speak about working in a team, I think, okay, that's why I didn't become a solicitor, I suppose. I was an only child, so I was used to my own company, used to working alone. It always seemed like if I was going to become a lawyer, to be not so much the natural choice, but almost the inevitable choice, or the inevitable perhaps destination is a better word. I certainly don't regret it, but it's hard, I suppose, to say that there's a positive conscious force that drove me towards becoming a barrister.
From my perspective, I went into my law degree not really knowing if I wanted to do law at all, and then you kind of get swept along by everything once you're there. As I said earlier, I got involved in mooting, which opened up being a barrister to me as a possibility. But the real turning point, I think, for me was, so I was thinking about going to the bar anyway, but in the summer between my second year and my third year, I did a vacation scheme at a Magic Circle firm, which, 2 weeks, I was sat in M&A, so mergers and acquisitions, for 2 weeks in August, when half the office wasn't there and there wasn't really anything for me to do other than look over some very, very long contracts. And I found it deeply boring. And I followed it immediately with 3 days in a barrister's chambers where we went off and got an emergency injunction to stop someone building something on a piece of land, and it was all terribly exciting. And so I'm afraid I was swayed by the excitement of one versus the other quite largely. And I thought that, a bit like Greg, I thought actually I enjoy working on my own. I enjoy working in complete silence, and I thought it would fit me better probably than a solicitor's career. But if I hadn't got a pupillage, then maybe I would have ended up as a solicitor. Who knows?
Jonathan.
So I think similarly to Dan, I think it was sort of the working in a team that drew me to being a solicitor rather than being a barrister. I think added to that, as someone doing the law conversion course and having not studied law, my sense is that it's definitely going from non-law to a training contract, I think is quite a well-trodden path. About half the people in my training intake did that, whereas my sense is that it is probably more difficult to become a barrister not having already done a law degree. I might be completely incorrect, but it was definitely, in terms of people that I was studying the GDL with, everyone I knew was trying to become a solicitor, and yeah, I didn't necessarily feel like there was an obvious path to becoming a barrister, but I might have been completely wrong about that. So.
Yeah, my experience was similar, really. Being a barrister, you're essentially self-employed, I guess, and I just kind of like the security of just being in a firm, in a team of people that I can work with. I'm not big on public speaking, so just to kind of get stuck into some documents and things suited me better than the kind of concept of advocacy, which is a lot of a barrister's work. So that was the rationale for my decision.
Thank you. And so, yeah, so day to day, what does a day to day look like, or is that also a myth? And there is no specific typical day to day. And I guess in that, what are the things that you enjoy most about your job, and what do you find challenging? And that doesn't have to necessarily be badge challenging. It could just be, you know, there are things that, you know, work a little bit bumpier than others, and you push through, and maybe you enjoy that.
For me, there isn't, and I suspect for most lawyers, really, there isn't such a thing as a typical day-to-day. If I'm in court, my day has a very different shape to the days leading up to court, or the days when I'm working on something that isn't directly related to an imminent hearing. Outside of court, the consistent themes are, I suppose, just trying to understand things, solve things, see a way through the maze, provide an answer that's helpful, that's constructive. In court, it's really just a question of, it's very much like being in an exam. I think you have to be in that zone of complete concentration, have your sort of 360-degree vision, stroke spidey sense on the whole time, be on top of and in command of your materials. The things that are enjoyable are obviously doing something well, winning, leaving the client satisfied. The things that are less enjoyable, I think, I don't know whether I'm unique in this, but I think for me, one of the least enjoyable aspects of my job is having to come to a landing on something, a decision about something, where it is just not clear. You could see that when you can see that whichever way I jump on this isn't wrong, I find that hateful, because I always end up thinking the way I'm going to jump is going to be wrong or isn't going to be right, perhaps. So that navigating the sort of uncertainties is the thing I find, I think, the most stressful. And coincidentally, it's what makes advocacy at trial, I think, and trials in general, so stressful. The uncertainties, the variabilities that you can't iron out until your witness or the other side's witness have given their evidence, and then certainty starts to descend. So I suppose in general terms, it's having to manage but not be able to resolve uncertainties and variabilities.
And just picking up that theme from Gregor there about having to come to a landing on stuff, we have that same thing, but actually, weirdly, in my day-to-day, that's the bit that's sometimes most enjoyable, because we have rather than having to argue it in court and then finding out definitive if you're right or wrong, generally our clients will have to make a decision, and it's their own decision, and it may then get buried and never actually be tested, or it might come under full scrutiny of a regulator in my line of work. And those for us are the bits that are really quite enjoyable. It's an area that's not clear. You work out what the best answer might be and build in reserve the arguments you'd have to deploy if you ever got challenged on it. Deliver your advice, and if the client is a good client, because not all of them are, they recognize that it's their decision to make and stand behind, and your advice sort of is one factor in that, along with whatever other factors they're building in. Those bits of advice are sort of the most challenging and the most rewarding to do, as compared to something where it's a question that's just requires you to find something hidden in a. So we have tons and tons of. It's a bit like tax rules for us for the financial services sector. There is a ton of rules. If it's just a question where an answer is buried somewhere in a book, then that's more of a kind of a treasure hunt, which is slightly less satisfying than having to kind of work up arguments. There is a bit more of a regularity to my days, even amongst Freshfields different departments. Our team is because it has quite a bit of advisory work. We're not running the transactions with the kind of boom and bust stuff. It tends to have a rhythm. So I tend to I don't think I've ever got to work with nothing to do in all the years I've worked. There's always a long to-do list, and you get through the bits that you can get through in the day and try and switch off from the rest that you haven't got done when you switch off at night. I've got a 2 and a 4-year-old, so I tend to try and pack up at about 5:45, 6 o'clock and cycle home to do bath time and put them to bed, have dinner with my wife, and then we both log on afterwards because we're super cool and work for a couple more hours and then head off to bed. So that's our daily rhythm is sort of built around the kids' routine, really, which adds time to your day. It means you have less time to yourself, but it's definitely worth it. I'm super glad that I work somewhere that I can see them to bed. And I think if you spoke to most of the population and describe my day, they'd be like, "You're a madman. You don't hardly see your kids and you work super hard." But actually, in the context of city law, it's not a bad balance, and the work is very interesting. So it's not a hardship to log on after you've had your dinner and do it, because it's something you kind of want to do.
Simone, can I answer a slightly different question to one you asked, which is,
of course,
not what my day-to-day life is like now, but what it was like for the first couple of years as a baby barrister, because I think that might be helpful for anyone considering studying the law. And the first answer to that is that it very much depends what area of law you go into, what your day-to-day life is going to be like, especially at the bar. If you're a criminal barrister, then you will be in court every day, especially as a baby barrister. You will be being given briefs at 4 o'clock and expected to turn up at 10:30 to argue them and know what you're talking about. Slightly less like that in the on the civil side of things, but for the first couple of years that I was in practice, I was probably in court 2 or 3 times a week, not on full days and cross-examination and everything like that, but on little 15-minute, half-hour hearings in county courts around the southeast, in varying locations, often in London, and that's, you get used to, you have to learn to pick up something and run with it and come to a good enough answer and be prepared for the following day, and not be too fazed by it. But the skills that you build up whilst doing that are second to none and invaluable, because you get that experience, you get that advocacy experience. So when I was very, very junior, it was a lot of court work, some paperwork, but appearing a lot in court, and that has changed as time goes on, because basically you get involved in fewer bigger cases than the kind of little bits and bobs that you get when you're very, very junior. So things do change, and I'm now I'm in court much less frequently, and when I am in court, it's generally for something slightly more substantial, but not always. But things do just change, and you get better at managing your time as well, I think.
That's a really good perspective on that. Absolutely. Because of course, as careers evolve and change, then the requirements that you have to do. So I guess, Kira, this might be a nice point for you to jump in as a trainee solicitor to kind of talk about your day. We can kind of contrast that with what Dan has said.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's very different being a trainee solicitor, particularly because you move departments. So in most firms, you'll move every 6 months. At Freshfields, the trainees rotate every 3 months to a different department, which means that there's no typical day, because it will depend on which department I'm in, the deal I'm working on, who I'm working with, because everyone has different working patterns. And as a trainee, you kind of have to slot into the team, slot into your supervisor's routine, and kind of go with that, which can be a downside, because I don't really have control or oversight over my work. I kind of do what I'm told by the people I'm working with. And some people are more understanding than others about fitting in kind of plans and like preferred working hours and that kind of thing. Generally, it can be difficult to make evening plans because people often like to work late into the evening and you're kind of expected to be online to help with things. I do like to try and make evening plans so I have a kind of a work-life balance and a good social life. But if I do, it's always kind of warning people some work might come up, I might have to respond to some emails or something. I went out for dinner last night, I had to get my laptop out for a little bit, but luckily my friend was very understanding and let me go and work away for about 10 minutes. So that can be a downside, but equally it means that it's always kind of intellectually stimulating, it's always challenging. Every time you move, you're having to learn a whole new type of law, all new documents to kind of get to grips with. And so the intellectual challenge isn't more like intense research questions that you might get once you're an expert in something. It's just, what is this document? What does it all mean? Who are these parties? And just like having to apply your brain to that kind of challenge, which means that no 2 days are the same. And actually it can be very interesting. So there's kind of good bits of the job and bad bits of the job, but it's definitely something to bear in mind before you go into the career, is that it's but it's part of the process of learning, I suppose, and you have to go through this steep learning curve to get to the point where you're an expert in something.
Absolutely. And I think, law, but of course, so many other careers that law students or just anybody ends up into, those first few years are often very intense. You're learning a lot, you're maybe jumping around here or there, here and there. And then, once you find a rhythm, things do adapt and change. So it's nice to hear these in the legal context, but of course, always mindful that it shouldn't deter anybody necessarily from law. It's something that all of us, it's a rite of passage as you develop your careers. We have one question that I'd like us to end on, because I realize we've only got 5 minutes left, but I think it's an interesting one to kind of end on, which is this idea of, do you think there's going to be high demand for lawyers in the future? / what do you think law as a profession is going? And I mean, this is very much kind of larger kind of meta thoughts, but I mean, you enter in a career in what you have right now, but of course, I mean, lawyers tend to sort of stay in things. So it'd be interesting to kind of see where you think things are going, perhaps, how they're changing. It could also be changes you want to see. So let's maybe just end on that briefly.
Maybe I'll give the short and easy answer, and then the others can do the more difficult points. Lawyers are definitely here to stay, and the profession's not going anywhere. Undoubtedly, it will change, as it has over the course of our careers already. But I'm assuming the assumptions baked into my answer there are that society will always need laws to function, and will always need people to operate them and to apply them and to interpret them. And if you take that as what we do, then that's not going away anytime soon. Things that are changing that you can foresee will make a difference to what a lawyer looks like in 10, 20 years time are the use of AI and automation. So to pick a couple of examples from our firm, we've now got a system that we use, and I think most of the other big solicitor firms will do the same, where you can tell it to look for change of control provisions in a contract that might restrict your ability to transfer the contract from one party to another, and it's reviewed tens of thousands of these contracts, so it knows what that kind of clause looks like, and you just press a button and it churns through a data room and does it, rather than 15 juniors sat for 2 weeks reading everything. But that hasn't really stopped there being a need for lawyers. It just means that those juniors now do different things instead, including interpreting the things that this machine spits out. So yeah, it'll certainly change, but it's not going anywhere. I feel like it's a solid career option for people who like stability and enough excitement, but not too much. If you want to do like something super exciting and be a cryptocurrency trader, maybe that's got a shorter shelf life, but you'll get more kicks out of it. But law is a good kind of banker choice.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I mean, at a very extraordinarily high macro level, as long as you're living in a functioning Western democracy, you've got the rule of law, which means you've got law and you've got courts, and you've got resolutions, and that means you've got lawyers. I think the bigger question is the one that Dan highlighted, which is how will the role of lawyers and the practice of law change over the next 30 years? And I could see AI making an increasing inroad into some of the work at the moment that is pretty mundane and needs to be done. I could possibly see that perhaps more small-scale litigation will be done on paper, just to keep the costs down, to perhaps try and increase accessibility to the court system, because that is a real problem for ordinary people in this country. But I wouldn't think that there would be much of a reduction in the volume of lawyers. It's more a change in the way in which they have to perform their tasks.
Anybody else have one other comment? We've only got 2 minutes on the clock, but if somebody has one other thought they'd like to add to that, we'd certainly welcome it as a note to end on.
Just to echo what's been said, I think people are always going to disagree, and as long as people disagree, there's going to be a need for lawyers. And as Dan said, you know, as long as there are laws governing things, there's going to be a need for people to know what they're doing and read those rules and tell people what they say and give them advice based on what they say. And so I don't see lawyers going anywhere. I think the profession's going to change. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how it changes, both sides of the profession, over the next few years. But I don't see the need for lawyers decreasing at all, particularly.
Great. I think that's an excellent note on which to end things today. I just want to thank all of you for giving up an hour of your time to join us today, because I know you're all exceptionally busy by the sounds of things, doing lots of very important things. So we're always incredibly grateful for the willingness of our alumni to kind of come back and help out and participate. So thank you so much. I'm sure everybody here who's been joining us has had a lot to think about from your comments. So thank you so much. And of course, if anybody has questions, who's listening in, you can send us emails. Hopefully we can answer them in some way, shape or form. You can send them to the outreach@law.cam.ac.uk email. Please join us tomorrow if you have any admissions questions, and take care and good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Good luck, everyone.
Thanks. Right.